Tales of Estolia. Volume 1. The Promise of Zacharias. Part 5. According to Prophecy. Chapter 15. Objection.
Mortals suppose that the gods are born and have clothes and voices and shapes like their own. But if oxen, horses, and lions had hands, or could paint with their hands, and fashion works as men do, horses would paint horse-like images of gods, and oxen, oxen-like ones, and each would fashion bodies like their own. The Ethiopians consider the gods flat-nosed and black, the Thracians blue-eyed and red-haired. Attributed to Xenophanes of Colophon.
Sickening!
The voice was droll. Elora flicked one wrist, and the scene froze. She turned around and saw that it was Paldea, and behind her several other deities.
Why?
You expend all your energy and efforts making them happy and healthy.
She gestured to the ceremony frozen behind Elora.
What does any of this have to do with the actual purpose of the grand design?
Elora moved away from Paldea and the others and approached the dais.
How many of you still have this level of cohesion in your region and religion?
That is not the purpose of the grand design.
Herschel joined Paldea. Elora was amazed that those two appeared to be allies, Herschel, who hated her, and Paldea, who hated male deities of any shape or inclination.
Why do either of you care?
Elora asked. Herschel had predicted that she would fail. Paldea had her own ulterior motives.
Have you ever stopped to consider how useless your backward little island is to the actual purpose behind the grand design? How will a technology-phobic society solve the problem?
Herschel asked.
I'm surprised that you haven't been called to account for your lack of progress.
Elora's brow wrinkled as she looked from one to the other.
Anoxes is only a myth by this time,
she said to Paldea. Turning to Herschel, she added,
I did not think you would be involved, and was surprised to see that you'd been selected as one of the major deities. How are your people faring?
He did not answer her, and Elora was ashamed of herself. His people, with all their science and advanced understanding of the world around them, were decimated, as they had been in every other iteration with and without interference of deities. If the Mayans were the solution they were looking for, they would not find it this time, and time was running out. She stepped towards Herschel and set her hand on his arm, sincere in her attempt to heal the wound she'd just given him.
That was an unworthy thing to do and say, Herschel. Please accept my remorse as genuine.
He returned the gesture. He settled his hand over hers, his thumb stroking her skin for several seconds before his touch turned cruel, and he flung her hand away from him.
I challenge your involvement.
He invoked the words designed to bring Caleria and Krinos. She stepped away from him as if he'd slapped her. She wondered if the true flaw in the grand design was in allowing those who were less than perfect, with all their biases and preconceptions, to influence this world. A tone sounded, indicating that they would soon have a full conference of deities. While she waited, she thought back to Cosumnes. He had postulated that it was the emotional involvement of the deities that kept them from finding the solution. Under his supervision, the fifth iteration was directed by an elaborately programmed series of automatons written to take the place of deities. The chaos that resulted had earned Cosumnes a notable mention in the chronicles, but did not solve the problem. The others began to arrive and assemble themselves along the tiers at the back of the ceremony room. Elora considered switching to a time when the room was not occupied, instead of with the ceremony frozen behind her, but decided she would leave it. This was the catalyst event, after all. When Krinos and Caleria joined the others, Elora was relieved to see that it would not be all the deities involved in this iteration. Aside from Herschel, it was just the minor deities.
A challenge has been entered into the record.
Caleria said. She looked at the assembled deities, and then at the ceremony frozen in time. Curiously, she walked over to the tableau and looked at the participants. She then returned to stand by Crino's side, looking at him. Their eyes met and his lips quirked in the tiniest of smiles before he looked up at the assembled deities.
No participant may be removed from the grand design. The only way out is if there are no adherents, nobody with the blood of the progenitors, and no record of their place upon this world that remains.
Herschel's nostrils flared, and a vein throbbed in his temple. Before he could say whatever was building up within him like a volcanic explosion, Paldea spoke into the supercharged silence.
Alora uses her subjects to affirm her own romantic notions. She makes no attempt to guide them towards the actual purpose of the grand design.
She gestured to the ceremony. She made the word romantic sound as desirable as a virulent disease. Caleria looked from Paldea to Alora and then to Herschel.
And your objection, Herschel?
His eyes narrowed.
I agree with Paldea. Elora begged for this iteration, and she was granted the expenditure of resources to follow her hypothesis. We are all locked into this iteration once initiated, and she spends much of her time doing absolutely nothing towards our stated purpose.
Krynos asked.
Have you any rebuttal, Alora?
They could not remove her, but she could face sanctions, supervision, and even suspension of her powers. She flicked one wrist and the scene surrounding them dissipated, to be replaced by another. This time they were in the cathedral, and two men were giving a blessing to a red-haired woman.
3 sons will bless her womb, 1 to rule Estolia, 1 to safely keep her soul, and 1 to act as a catalyst of change in the greater world. This woman is worthy to keep the soul of the king. Only through the salvation of the planet will Estolia remain safe. This flame-haired woman will have a lasting impact on the nation. As a catalyst of change, her 3rd son will be instrumental in the rebirth of a golden era of global cooperation.
She froze the scene, and then looked at Krynos and Caleria. The scene she just replayed was echoing through her memory, and she could feel the air cooling her tear-wet cheeks. She had to stifle the emotions that were welling up at the thought of the impact her meddling would have on the lives of the 3 boys. Swallowing, she said.
The scene within the temple was the first of the 3 sons of Lilane, finding his Kaylee, his mate, and beginning the process of fulfilling this prophecy. Though it be subtle, I have always had the purpose of the grand design at the forefront of my mind, and everything I do here in Estolia is for that purpose. It may not be obvious, but all my actions have had one goal. I am determined that this will be the iteration where we will find the solution, my people will prevail.
Caleria spoke after several moments of silence.
As required, we will check back at regular intervals to verify your progress.
Paldea's eyes were frigid, brimming with hatred. Herschel, by her side, was apoplectic, spluttering in fury. Elora turned her back on the two, looking for her friends. Alanis was frowning, a deep furrow between her brows, and her lips were moving, as if she was arguing with someone. Zenta grabbed Alanis' arm, and started to pull her towards the portal. She glanced up, her eyes momentarily locking with Elora's before she looked away, her expression furtive, secretive. Both stepped through the portal before she could speak with them. She would seek them out later, when she had time. With a flash of insight, Elora understood that her priorities, to find the solution through the grand design, at all costs, were not shared by all of her colleagues. With so much dependent on the results, it was incomprehensible that the future of their world and society was irrelevant. The motives of her fellow deities were as unique and varied as their personalities. Krynos and Caleria supported her in her efforts. They were involved for the same altruistic reasons as Elora, but Paldea and Herschel, a most unlikely duo, were combining their talents to form a coalition with some nefarious purpose. They would use her unique approach as a lever against her. They were going to manipulate the system, and they would try again. Knowledge is power, she thought. The next time they tried to undermine her efforts, she would be prepared.